Welcome everybody to this webinar on designing regenerative food systems. So good morning, we've got people from all over the world, all over Europe, all over Britain, Wiltshire even. And so welcome. My name's Martin Large and Hawthorne Press, and we're delighted that this is a launch for Marina O'Connell's new book, Designing Regenerative Food Systems, which took 6 years and is a much bigger job or bigger book than we thought, because Marina in the meantime was developing the Apricot Centre farm at Totnes successfully. And so the purpose of this session, very briefly, is to explore the why, the what and the how of designing regenerative food systems with Marina O'Connell, who will describe the story of the farm, of the book, and the challenges it addresses. Hannah Thorogood of Inkpot Farm in Lincolnshire. And I gather Hannah may well be in a field with cows to tell some of her story. And thirdly, Julia Wright of the Centre for Agroecology and Water Resilience at the University of Coventry. She's also the chair of the Biodynamic Association. She'll introduce subtle agroecologies, which deepens the perspective on how we design and develop regenerative farms. So the benefits of this session, I hope it'll give you a really good overview of Marina's design toolkit. And uniquely, she gets out of the biodynamic and the permacultural silo, which she was never in anyway, and she draws on agroecology, biodynamics, organics, agroforestry, permaculture, as well as regenerative farming, and she will illustrate with her story how she's drawn on those with an impact study. So these are farm design solutions from the ground up, which the Oxford Real Farming Conference is so good at supporting and providing a context for. So the batting order, the seminar lasts till 10:30. Firstly, Colin Tudge will welcome us and how designing regenerative food systems will help bring about an agroecological revolution, and it's just what's needed. Secondly, Marina O'Connell will talk for 15 minutes, giving the overview and the book story. Thirdly, Hannah Thorogood of Inkpot Farm. Fourthly, Julia Wright with her subtle agroecologies for 15 minutes. I'll offer 5 minutes tips on land access, and then we'll have 30 minutes Q&A. And I hope you will put your questions in the Q&A for us to look through for the last 30 minutes Q&A session. And it's very much, the ground rules for this are very much mutual support, respect, listening and inquiry, building a sense of convivial community and going through this together, especially the tech bit. I'm terrified of the tech bit and hope and thank goodness we've got Helena here as our volunteer and helping hand. So over to you, Colin, as the co-founder of the ORFC, for your welcome and introducing us to your convivial Agrarian Renaissance. So over to you, Colin.
Thank you, Martin, and hello to everybody. I've been looking at agriculture very hard, actually, for more than half a century. And it's occurred to me quite early on that not only that agriculture needs to be rethought from first principles, but that in order to put agriculture to right, nothing can be put to right ad hoc. We actually have to rethink everything across the board from first principles, and we have to do the thinking, because governments and corporates and all that lot are not actually going to do it. But although the thinking has to be across the board, in morality, politics, economics, science, the whole lot, it all focuses in the end on food and farming. And the fact of the matter is that if we get food and farming right, then all the rest, in principle at least, could begin to fall into place. And if we get food and farming wrong, then the whole world is messed up. And at the moment, we're getting it horribly wrong. What we need is what we've been calling real farming. I like to call it enlightened agriculture, but real farming will do. And the idea of real farming is very simple. It is just to produce good food for everybody forever, without wrecking the rest of the world, without wrecking the biosphere. That's the kind of farming we need. What we have is what I think could probably be called neoliberal industrial farming, which is not designed to provide good food for everybody, etc., etc. It is designed primarily to maximize and concentrate measurable wealth. That's the neoliberal bit, because in the neoliberal economy, wealth is considered to be the only measure of value. And producing lots of wealth and concentrating wealth is a quite different ambition from trying to produce good food for everybody and looking after the natural world. And it leads us in quite different directions. Now, real farming is compounded of two well-established but still somehow novel ideas. One is agroecology, and agroecology treats every farm as an ecosystem. It's effectively a closed system, but as Bex Hosking very, I think, cogently says, it's a closed system with leaky borders. So it's a closed system that very much flows into the natural world and receives from the natural world, for example, solitary bees and pollen and all the rest. And the second great principle of real farming is food sovereignty. Every society should have control of its own food supply. Now, in designing regenerative foods, the essential elements of the, let me start again. The essential thing that the qualities of agroecology, I think there's 6 main things. One is organic farming in general, one is biodynamic farming, one is agroforestry, one is regenerative agriculture, one is permaculture. And this is what Marina discusses very, very well in her new book. The only one missing from that list is pasture feeding, although Marina's book is not just about plants, it's also about animals.
One more minute, Colin. One more minute.
I can do one more minute. Agroecology is clearly what's needed, and it's now accepted in enlightened circles such as these, that is the case. Unfortunately, big governments like ours and the corporates and the Royal Society and the other mainstream scientists and, of course, neoliberal economists have not cottoned onto the idea. They're still rooted in the idea that industrial chemistry, genetic engineering and all the rest are modern and therefore represent progress and are therefore good. And this actually is a very 19th century idea. This is what we want to get across. Now, what we need to make things happen is, on the one hand, thinkers, and on the other hand, doers. And the very good thing about Marina is that she is both a thinker and a doer. And this book, I think, is an excellent sort of confluence of the two. Thank you.
So thank you, Colin, for your warm welcome and brilliant summary. And now it's over to Marina O'Connell to introduce her farm story and the book story. And I think you'd agree, Marina, that the book was a bigger job than you thought.
Absolutely. Good morning. Thank you for your very kind introductions. Yeah, trying to condense the story of the book and the farm into 15 minutes is a little bit of a challenge, but I'll give it a go. I could start with Once Upon a Time, because Martin's always encouraging me to tell stories, but once upon a time, in roughly 2014, Martin Large, with his Biodynamic Land Trust hat on, and the Apricot Centre both embarked upon a project, and that project was to buy the Huxhams Cross Farm, which was at that point part of Dartington Hall Trust, It's a small farm, it's only 13 hectares or 37 acres. It had been in industrial dairy farming for the last 40 years and had an amazing, well, it still has got an amazing position on the edge of the Dartington Hall estate. So of course we're part of that incredible community. The aim was that we needed to regenerate it because the contractor that I walked around, who'd worked the farm for many years, said, "Oh, it is a miserable bit of land," he said, pretty much saying good luck to you. So in this process, we set out, in the process of buying the farm, we set out to give lots of talks to generate investment into the farm, selling shares in the farm, and we ended up with 150 shareholders in the farm, part of the farm's community. And part of giving those talks, as I talked about the plans that we had for the farm with my colleagues, Bob Mayhew, who's project manager and spreadsheet genius, and my husband, Mark O'Connell, who's sitting here helping me with the technology. And our plan was to weave together permaculture design, biodynamic farming, agroforestry, and anything else we could think of to put in the pot to create the most regenerative sort of farm we could. And why did we think we needed to do that? We needed to do that because we have a perfect storm, as I'm sure many of you know. We've got the perfect storm of the 4 challenges facing food production. So we've got farms are unique in that not only that can they decarbonise themselves, but they actually have the ability to offset carbon emissions from other areas of life. They can become carbon negative, basically. Farms need to be resilient to climate change. So again, a lot of you, I imagine, here listening to this might well be farming we are now in real-time climate change, which makes every farming year a challenge, to put it mildly, I would say, in my experience. Farms need to offset biodiversity loss. Farms occupy 70% of the land use in the UK. I appreciate there are people here from all over the world, but it's pretty much the same story. And if we are going to offset biodiversity, catastrophic biodiversity loss that's been going on since the rollout of industrial farming, biodiversity needs a place on farms, and it's completely possible to do that. We also need to produce enough food for everybody because we've got an increasing population for the next 20 to 30 years. And how on earth do we do that all whilst being economically viable businesses? Depending on who you talk to or listen to, we've got until 2030, 2040, 2050 to do that. And considering these farms take 5 to 10 years to actually get them up and running and being effective, we basically need to start doing this now. So when we first started writing this book, I called it Farms for the Future, and it's turned into being Farms for Now. So how do we meet this perfect storm? So it's not just my suggestion, but lots of people's suggestions that we can meet these challenges, as Colin said, at the same time by using a toolkit of farming systems. And some of these have been around for almost 100 years. So as Colin said, and my lovely friends Martin and Wolf used to always say, to create truly sustainable, or what we could say now, regenerative systems, we need to go back to the point of divergence and recreate farms using these methods that are based on biology and ecology rather than chemistry. So if we look at, so it's not a brilliant slide, but if we look at this just as a visual, in 1913, nitrate fertilizers were developed and that was the beginning, if you like, of the second industrial revolution. And what we have is the timeline that resonates and reacts to that. And so if we have the next slide. We've got a list of systems, and there are more than I've listed here, but that would be an encyclopedia if we included all of them. So just to run through these very briefly. Just before we do that, what I'd like to say is I liken these systems, and perhaps we could say the Oxford Real Farming Conference, is a bit like a slow motion art fringe festival that's been going on for the last sort of 100 years. So what we all know, those of us that are part of this movement, is that it's an incredibly vibrant, creative, exciting place to be when you're farming. And but it is very much on the edge, you know, in mainstream farming conferences, or when I do farm walks here with people from mainstream farming, they haven't heard of many of these words. They might have heard of one, but they've rarely heard of all six. So what I like to think is that if you hang out in the fringe festivals for long enough, they become mainstream. And I think that's what we might be seeing in this next agrarian renaissance, or next farming agricultural revolution. So each one of these systems brings something new to the party, so to speak. So if we think of biodynamic farming, arose from farmers asking Rudolf Steiner in 1924 what could they do about the loss of vitality in their soils that they'd already noticed after 10 years of nitrate fertilizers. He suggested the use of certain preparations that were very possibly based on Vedic farming systems in India. They're closed loop, or becoming closed loop. They're small mixed farms. Biodynamics pioneered the concept of community supported agriculture, and BD soils are often the most biodiverse and some of the best at sequestering carbon, and also they produce the best wines. Organic farming partially grew out of the biodynamic farming. Also Albert Howard's work and observation in India, also Vedic farming, and his discussions and experiments and work with Eve Balfour in the UK. And of course, both of these systems are both what's called codified, or they have standards. And if you stick to those standards, you can get a certificate that says you can sell your produce with those labels on it. So I'm doing a bit of a skip through these because I feel in a way the real story is how we've used them in farming together. Permaculture rose in the 1970s with Bill Mollison and David Holmgren, and they developed an incredibly strong design system to create ecologically productive and harmonious systems that will provide earth care, fair shares and people care. So providing our needs enough for us, but not too much, and making sure there was enough for everybody and for the earth and our non-human family as well. Permaculture also focused very much on creating diverse and closed loop systems. Agroecology as a term was actually coined in the 1930s and 40s, but it came to the fore in the 70s, partially as an academic practice, but also in the global south. It's in, and the north, but it's a huge social and political movement. And it's again brought the concept of food sovereignty right up to the negotiating tables. But however, agroecology doesn't have a sort of set of standards. It's more that you would say that you had an agroecology farm, and because of that, it's had a much broader uptake than organic and biodynamic farming around the world. It's an incredibly successful social and political movement, and it focuses very much from the bottom up with peer-to-peer learning in the field, and action learning, actually learning from doing. And one of the things that Julia will talk about is how, although obviously in the UK, agroecology tends to be focused on our Western worldview, but actually because it's so encompassing in the global South, that often it will really encompass a more indigenous worldview of farming and food and land, which, as Colin pointed out, is what we'll need for the future. Agroforestry systems, again, have been around forever. The term agroforestry arose in the 70s, and it puts trees back in the systems, from forest gardens through to alley cropping, and with all the benefits of management of soil and water management, carbon sequestration, and bringing biodiversity back into our farms. And then finally, regenerative farming or agriculture was termed by the Rodale Institute. It's got really wide uptake, both across the industrial and the ecological farming movement. It's called an emergent system in that nobody's quite pinned it down yet, but a regenerative farm would really be looking at restoring and regenerating 5 systems: the soil, the biome, the carbon cycle, the nutrient cycle, biodiversity, and including the farm, a human economic community ecosystem. And it's this term that encompasses using a toolkit of all of these systems and more to repair and restore our farms, our food systems, and our communities. What do they have in common? They're not completely closed loop, but they're more closed loop. They're polycultural, they're diverse, they build organic matter, they've got lots of trees, they're highly productive, they tend to have short supply chains, they are economically viable, they are connected community to community, and they inhabit what I refer to as the psychology of abundance. So to move on then is to tell the story at Huxhams Cross. So Huxhams Cross, as I said, was a 13-hectare farm. It was bought in 2015 by 150 shareholders, and we used a toolkit of permaculture design, agroforestry and biodynamic methods. So at the beginning, we spent a long time doing a permaculture design, a year, and we involved all of our stakeholders, our community, our team, our embryonic team, and of course the Biodynamic Land Trust. And what we designed was a farm that would grow fruit and vegetables, produce eggs. We have small scale grain. We grow YQ wheat that is milled and sold as flour and baked into bread. And we are also home to a clinical mental health service for young and looked after people and their families. Our functions, we decided early on, our functions were to basically meet the 4 challenges. So if we move on, we can see that this is, our farm basically was 6 fields. It's a very small farm to start with, and 3 of those were arable fields, 2 were wetland meadows, and 1 was the particularly miserable bit of land that the contractor said we'd never managed to sort out. So this is what it looked like to start with. And this is what it looks like now. It's developed a little bit further. So what we did, so this is our main market garden field and our training centres and barns. We planted 3,000 agroforestry trees on the contour in this particular field. They are hazel, coppiced hazel. We planted 1,300 fruit trees on our farm, but also in combination with the agroforestry project on the Dartington Hall estate. We put deep rooting green manures into these fields to start the whole process off for 2 years. We added the biodynamic preparations to re-inoculate the soil biome. Obviously, you can use lots of different methods to do this. And we did something called keyline ploughing to take the water out and allow the air in. 30% of the farm is put down to nature, and we had these incredible wetland meadows and had been abandoned. We put 2 cows on them called Dams and the Daffodil, and 5 years later, this last summer, I counted 700 orchids. So after 5 years, we did an impact assessment. So our community was very keen to know what we could achieve. So what we did is did baseline studies, and then 5 years later, very kindly, the Devon Environmental Foundation gave us a little bit of money, and Rachel Bolan did an impact study for us. And so what we found is that we are carbon negative. So we sequester roughly 10 tonnes of carbon per hectare per year, and of that we use 5 tonnes, so we are carbon negative, which is positive. We are carbon negative to 5 tonnes per hectare per year. We collect So what we know is our main emissions come from our bought-in chicken food. So we're aiming to integrate that locally in the next year. From fuels, we can switch to an electric vehicle, and we're still paying off the carbon debt on our barn. And in terms of sequestration, our biggest effect has been from our soil, building our soil organic matter. We harvest more than 100,000 litres of water a year. Obviously, it rains it doesn't rain as much in Devon as it used to. And we've managed to not use any mains water for irrigation for the last couple of years as our soil carbon has built. We grow 100 plus types of fruit and vegetables, and I often liken it to a game of bingo. Because of the difficult weather conditions, we never get a full house, so to speak, but we always have something that it has a good year and something has a bad year. So we always have something to sell. We've had an increase in biodiversity, so our worm count, it's not really a surprise, has gone up by 100%. In some areas it's gone up more than that. Our bird species count has gone up, in fact, by 50% rather than 30%, as it says on the slides. I've just written there, we produce a lot of food. So we do produce a lot of food. In fact, it was 15 tonnes of fruit and vegetables, 6 tonnes of wheat every year, and many, many eggs. We sell all of that within a 20-year radius, 20-mile radius of the farm. We employ 8 people on the farm team, and about another 8 on the wellbeing team. We are economically viable, and we have a positive social impact. We worked with CAWR to do our social impact, and we know from the feedback from our customers that they love our food. And I just wanted to finish. So basically, what we found is with not too much investment, you know, on really not a brilliant piece of land, we've created a farm, a very effective farm in a short period of time, using these toolkits of methods. And I just wanted to finish on this slide. So what I wanted to say in summary was that creating these farms requires a broad skill set, and it's very rare that one person would have those skills. It requires a team. And these skills are, so I often use this model because partly I'm married to a psychotherapist. So this is a model where we work not only in the consensus reality world of money and spreadsheets and soils and tractors and things like that, but also when we're working with land and with communities, we need to work in what I call the dreaming level. So that's also the creativity, where the creativity comes from, and using our intuition and building relationships, weaving relationships between the lands and our communities. So not only do we need to weave back these relationships between the land and these communities, we also need to weave together these different farming systems to create these new farms, and we need to weave together our teams that can bring these into being. And indeed invite people along to this very exciting festival that we have. So I'm going to pass on now to Hannah, who I think is going to give us a live demonstration of what this might look like in the flesh, so to speak, in the real day. Thank you very much for listening.
Morning, thanks, Marina. It's so lovely to hear you talk, Marina. Marina and I have worked together for a long time, and if you're not familiar with Marina's work, obviously buy the book, but look at the amazing work that she's doing, because it's not just what's happened at Huxhams farm, but it's the farm before that, Apricot Centre in Essex, that was a real inspiration to me. And it was lovely when we were just starting here to see the Apricot Centre in Essex 10 years old, and really, Marina was very reassuring at that time and said, you know, look, 10 years in and you really start to see the benefits. So here I am at the Inkpot, reporting live from the field. I thought I'd take the opportunity, seeing as we can't all be there together. I was either going to be inside kind of staring at you, frowning at you from a messy house, or it's such a beautiful morning out here, I thought I'd come out and show you, and in a moment attempt to do a rather stupid thing probably of moving the cows live. But first of all, I just wanted to introduce you to the Inkpot. So the Inkpot Organic Farm is a small farm. Well, it's a farm of varying sizes depending on what's going on. In South Lincolnshire in England, I've been here for 12 years. Started out as a family of 4, myself and my husband at the time, and with an 18-acre field that we managed to buy. I don't really believe in owning land, but there's a piece of paper somewhere with my name on it. And a few years down the line, the farm worked better than the marriage, let's say. So it's now, we're often referred to as a one-woman farm, but I don't think that's really fair, because my twin daughters, Elizabeth and Martha, now 14, have always been co-decision makers and co-farmers here. They both are at school full time, but everything that we do on the farm, every decision that we make is with their say-so and their disagreement as well, which is really encouraged. You know, it's their farm. So I'm just going to see if I can do I'm going to see if I can swap the camera around, and I'm not sure if it's wanting me to do that now. Okay, maybe I can't. So what I wanted to show you was this messy corner. So it's a bit difficult to show, but we have the I don't know if anyone on tech support before it was letting me, oh, there, hold on, here we are. Okay, so here we are on a really beautiful sunny morning. I just wanted to show you the edge. So these lovely lists that we've been seeing, that Colin has talked about and Marina has talked about agroecological approaches and what kind of methods we farm with. One of these approaches that's really, really important to the Inkpot is permaculture. It's a permaculture demonstration site. And I just wanted, well, this is our mob grazing pasture, which we're going to walk across further more in a minute. I just wanted to show you the importance of edge. All the way around the 18-acre home field, we have a 15-metre strip, and at times it's 30-metre strip of trees. So in permaculture, it's all about the edge. It's about the edge between 2 different systems. So through this hedge, we have a conventionally managed grassland. And I'll whisper it, but our grass grows better earlier and later without any pesticides, whereas there's a lot of pesticides put on that field. But they're friends of ours, it's fine, we can all be friends. Okay, so I just wanted to show you the messy, wonderful, wild strip that we have. And this strip, that strip actually is home to the turkeys throughout the season that we have turkeys. So here at the Inkpot, a lot of it is about the livestock. The animals of the system do the work for us. And so I'm just walking across here, which now probably looks like a very blank grass field, and that's because it is, because this field is really the engine of our system. We have a number of engines, and as Colin mentioned about pasture-fed livestock, we're proud members of the Pasture-Fed Livestock Association, happy to have hosted the study tour here this year. And what's going on underneath this soil is really the most important thing that we can be doing in terms of climate mitigation. And so this soil is actively sequestering carbon, sequestering methane. And if you're not sure about how that works, let me direct you towards the Inkpot YouTube channel, where there was a video I put up last month about how that all works, talking about methanotropes. So I'd just like to introduce you to the Inkpot cows. There's 11 of them. So, and they're being very patient standing here, wondering what on earth I'm doing. And so these are original population Lincoln Red. And I'm just gonna try with one hand on a cold morning to undo this wire that we have, and we'll see who's the bravest across the wire today. So they have been in this grazing overnight, and they're now sussing out whether it's safe to walk through these magic self-managing cows with their lovely winter coats. So these are original population Lincoln Red. We have a mixed age. We have mothers, daughters, sons. Oh, go on, Fritz. He's very worried about that fence. There we are, good brave boy. And yes, they all have names, as do our 150 sheep, all have names, and I can tell you the family trees of most of them. So there we are, live demonstration of cows. And interestingly, I think, oh no, they've all gone for the grass. The water is frozen overnight. Obviously, it was a -4 last night, and so the water has stopped. So what's that building in the background? I can hear a few of you wondering. That's in the middle of the 18-acre field. That's our reciprocal roof oak framed field shelter. I'm just going to redo this wire. And here, look at ground from last week. So that's our field shelter, and it is our classroom at various times as well. Okay, so I just wanted to show that, and I'm really pleased I didn't fall over on my bum in the middle of that. I thought that might happen. So here is what's left behind. Lovely, lovely poo. Anyone who's on the mob grazing group or the PFLA forum, we spend a lot of time talking about poo, grass residues, fencing, water. And what I just wanted to point across to you is the water trough there, which is being fed from across through a hose, and over there's a mound in the corner, and that's one of our rain-fed ponds. So the 11 cows, the 150 sheep, they all drink rainwater. So we have 2 rain-fed ponds in the field here, and we have various water butts and IBCs and stuff around the house, around the place. And so we have approximately 7 or 8 different fields at the moment. And so we ship rainwater from these ponds to those fields. Okay, so I'm going to look at my crib sheet to see what else I needed to say. So yeah, Marina laid out the fantastic challenges that we have for farming of climate change mitigation. And one of the most important things that we here at the Inkpot do is this grazing system. So the grass that they're going onto is quite short at the moment, but it's had 4 months recovery. So it hasn't been grazed for 4 months. And they're just at the point now where we'll be adding hay to their diet so that they're supplemented, but that's local hay. We also have resilience to climate change. And I think one of the most important things we have there is looking for how systems can cope under any weather extreme. And so we have a number of different ways across the whole farm. It's not just about the cows, but having enough rainwater storage that we can catch every drop when we have these incredible rainfall events. And then it's big enough that it can last through the months of drought that we've had and that we will have more of. It's also looking at how to cope with extremes of different weather conditions. And so we design our systems around that. Offsetting biodiversity loss. One of the main ways we do that is the way that we graze. The way that we also grow, we have a vegetable garden here. We have 3-4 different forest garden systems. We have that strip around the edge that I showed you before, including the big trees at the bottom there. So we are that strip of woodland that goes all the way around is meant as a continuous habitat, but it also will be supplying us for timber long term and firewood now. And one of the most important things that we do at the Inkpot is appropriate technology. So there's often joking about, we are actually currently a 100-acre farm. So it's 18 acres here, but we graze a number of different fields around. And that's quite an interesting aspect to what Martin will be talking about shortly in land access, that fields do appear when you can, not necessarily by banging your drum, but by just getting on with it and doing it, and farmers and other landowners start to notice the difference of what you're doing, like the grass growing longer, earlier, cleaner than neighbouring farms that use a lot more machinery and chemicals. And so the appropriate technology that we have here, was wanting to point out there, is we don't have a tractor. We are a 3-wheelbarrow farm. I do have a good old pickup that gets dragged around, or drags various trailers around the place. But we also have an electric car, and most of the sheep checks are done by that poor old electric car that I think it probably rues the day that it got bought and taken to the Inkpot, when I think a lot of its peers are probably living lovely suburban lives somewhere. And this one bounces around solar panel fields in summer when the ground's dry enough, and often has dead things in the back of it, and you know, all sorts of glamorous stuff. It looks pretty battered as well. But we also have a lot of solar PV on the farm, and solar hot water, and the heating in the house and the hot water in winter is all done by wood burner. We produce a lot of our own food, and we produce a lot of food locally. So the cows aren't doing very much at the moment. Let's see if we can, trying to technology. Oh, hello, there we are. And so we produce a lot of food locally. We sell all our food direct. So the produce that we have is lovely beef, we have hogget, so year-old sheep, and mutton. And thanks, Martin. Thank you. Turkeys for Christmas. But also I want to really talk about the people side of things, because in the permaculture design that's so important here is a permaculture demonstration centre. Is based on 3 ethics, and that's earth care, people care, and fair share. So the earth care we've talked about, but the people care is incredibly important, about looking after ourselves, our family, and the wider community. The fair share side of things, one of the very important things that we do here is check our privilege. So it's through an incredible amount of privilege that we can actually be in the place where we can say that we own land, however much we agree with that or disagree. And so however cash poor we can be at times, we're still at a very, very comfortable position compared to some others. So our wonderful Inkpot customers donate turkeys at Christmas to the food banks. We always have a proportion of our local egg round, and any surplus food that we can give to the local food bank, we do. And we also do fair pricing for all. But a very important part of that fair pricing for all is also us, the farmers, to make sure that we're actually getting a living wage from this. So there is so much more that I can talk about, but I'll stop because there's some fascinating stuff coming up as well. But I just wanted to thank you all for sharing this silly idea of being out in a freezing cold but beautiful morning with the cows doing a live move. So I'm going to hand over to Julia. I'm really excited to hear from Julia. Wright has got some really interesting research to share with you all. So thanks, folks, and over to Julia.
Thank you very much, Hannah, and I'm sorry to bring everybody indoors now, but I'm going to start sharing my screen with a sort of indoor presentation. So I work at Coventry University at the Centre for Agroecology, Water and Resilience. And I'm involved in a research programme, leading a research programme called Subtle Agroecologies, and I wanted to share a bit about this with you and see how it fits with regenerative farming systems, which it does. And there is a small piece in Marina's book on this as well. So it's about designing food systems in conscious participation with nature. I'm going to be talking about the British Isles really at the moment, although obviously this applies everywhere. And one practitioner of encouraging this conscious participation, Patrick McManaway, said that An awareness of the sentience of our landscape leads us to make a different set of choices from the ones that we would make if we weren't aware of its sentience and having a relationship with that. We know that, you know, with human beings, we treat people differently when we know them as opposed to when we don't. So there's been obviously a tradition of nature connection on the British Isles, and these are just some of the sort of practices, cultural practices that we know about, that I guess in the present day we still try and understand, because we've lost a lot of the the memory of it, but it can be regained, and you can see a lot of different views that you probably recognize. But so, you know, we know that communities still do, and they used to beat the bounds, and that's a photo of a group quite a while ago beating the bounds around Canterbury, and that practice was really swatting local landmarks with branches to maintain a shared mental map of the parish boundaries. But then there's also another aspect to it, which is that on an energetic level, the parish obviously was linked to the parish church, and the function of the church was to help landscape fertility and community well-being. So the boundaries are reinforced every year by beating them and laying them with flowers. And priests who were in service to the land and the people at that time were centered around the church, which was built in a specific place. And the choir singing in the church would sing for the land up to that boundary, which had been marked energetically. So the practices that we see now, we still remember or have some recall of. There was a very strong sort of metaphysical component to them, which we might not quite understand at the moment. Similarly, if you see the bottom left, the round towers, which are found quite a lot still in Ireland, nowadays they're thought to be watchtowers or places of protection. But from an energetic perspective, they're thought to be resonant systems for capturing and channeling electromagnetic energy and passing this on to the people who are meditating around the tower, and also to the farm or the land that was being cultivated nearby.
Julia,
yes.
Someone's just said, are you staying on one slide, or are you moving through the slide?
I'm staying on this slide while I'm talking about it, and then I'll move. Thank you. Stone circles as well were burial places, but also connected to astronomical observatories, ceremonies and energy centers. Labyrinths and mazes were similarly used for spiritual practice, as were henges, which were ceremonial places. And then you can see also a Beltane fire ceremony, which is still running up in Edinburgh, that particular one. And there, the performances in these ceremonies had two main characters: the May Queen, who represented Mother Earth, and the Green Man, who represents nature and the energy of summer. And it was the old Celtic tradition.
Apologies, Julia, I don't think people can see the slides you're talking about.
This is, I've just got one slide up at the moment.
Okay, fine, sorry.
Can you see it? Can you see this one slide with lots of different pictures?
No.
Ah.
So you need to move on to your second slide, Julia.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So that's the first slide. And now I'm on the second slide. No, it's gone back. Now I'm on the second slide. Can you see that?
No, we can't. Just try and unshare the screen and reshare again.
Yeah, okay, sorry about that. I can see it, so I just assumed everyone else could see it. And I have been speaking about one slide. Maybe if I don't make it full screen, can you see that?
Yes.
As traditional nature connections in the British Isles. So if I don't fully share the screen, I think that I might know when you're watching better than if I share the screen and then make it full screen. I'm going to keep it like this. Is that all right? It's a little bit smaller, but then I'm more aware of what's going on. Okay, thank you. Sorry about that, everybody. I've been talking about this slide for quite a while, and I didn't realize you couldn't see this one. So really just to say that, these fire ceremonies were also an old Celtic tradition where people would build 2 bonfires and would drive their livestock between the fires, believing the heat and smoke would purify the animals and get rid of any parasites. Similarly, there are animal totems like the salmon, which were druid totems to protect, but also to gain wisdom from and communicate with these particular animals. Well blessings, which we know were there to celebrate and thank the water, were also there to request that the water, the spirit of the water, continues to provide a fresh water supply, and that was done through singing, which is a vibration. And working with plant medicines, we know that cunning women or medicine women, and also, you know, the records we still have of traditional plant medicines had physical and spiritual dimensions to them. So all in all, these practices that we know about involved consideration of the seasons, of the energy of life and vitality of life, of the consciousness of animal, plants and minerals, as well as of the 4 elements of fire, water and air, the connection between the earth and the cosmos, weaving heaven and earth, we could say, and humans has been crucial to maintain that balance, which was never an end. You know, it was a goal, but it was always a dynamic process of maintaining that balance. So we have that. I'm going to stick with this, you know, with this format. We have that in, you know, in the British Isles. And, you know, if we want to look at where that's coming from in terms of our worldviews, we could see then that the worldview we have now, this modernist worldview, is very different from that traditional worldview that was there at that time when those practices were living throughout communities. And in our modernist worldview, in terms of how we deal with farming, you know, we could say that our goal is striving for increased productivity. And we know, however much we try, even in the alternative farming sector, we still kind of have to survive in this world where yields and money, economics is the main focus, whereas those indigenous or traditional worldviews were more about striving for balance and harmony. You know, similarly, we know that we tend to have a repetitive or linear perspective of life. That's maybe how we've been brought up, but those traditional worldviews are more about rhythm and cycles. And I know in agroecology, we do try and have think of a oneness with nature, but do we really connect with nature? Do we make that conscious connection with nature? I know we see nature as complex and holistic in agroecology, and we try and think of health and wellness rather than illness and disease focus. But then probably the main aspect that I feel that we still need to work on is this idea that there is a spirit in everything, in plants, animals and minerals. There's a consciousness that we can connect it with, and whatever maybe religious or spiritual tradition we come from or don't come from, you know, there's different ways to interpret it, but that doesn't mean it's not there. You know, it's just different. We have different names for it. So we are still in the alternative movement, still working mainly from, I would say, from a more material perspective. Now, why would we want to change that? Well, for a start, agroecology talks about being this sort of dialogue between Western scientific approaches and traditional knowledge and wisdom. And yet how much in agroecology in the West, in the British Isles, do we really bring in this traditional wisdom and this knowledge that's still living, and that's still maybe work in progress? And that's Miguel Altieri, who's one of the sort of fathers of agroecology, one could say. And then if we look at what other people have talked about, and this is Bill Mollison here, who kind of was quite vocal in saying we shouldn't bring our beliefs or including religious beliefs into what we're doing on the land, into permaculture. And he said permaculture is not biodynamics. And it doesn't deal with phenomena not verifiable by every person from their own experience or making their own experiments. So that sort of maybe typifies this idea that you know, our Western science has to be verifiable, has to be sorry, I'm just, you probably heard that there's someone at the door. I don't know who it is, so I'm going to try and ignore it. But you know,
3 more minutes, Julia.
Yeah, okay, so we have that perspective that maybe has somehow blocked us from looking into this more deeply. And then we have Rudolf Steiner, who came along, and he was actually trying to say, I think he would actually believe, or he'd agree with Mollison, that he was saying, don't just follow the agricultural lectures that he gave 100 years ago, but you have to practice them for yourself, and we need scientific experiments. And Steiner's, one of his contributions was to say there is a method for combining spiritually scientific considerations with practice and other forms of science. So Steiner, one of his main contributions that I don't think we, maybe we realize strongly enough is to say we can combine spirit and materialism. So there's more about this in this book of Subtle Agroecologies, and what I'm saying here is this Subtle Agroecologies isn't a farming system in itself, but it superimposes a non-material dimension upon materially based farming systems, and it's grounded in these lived experiences of people working with the land over millennia. I have a PhD student who's been looking at this because we're saying, do these practices work? He's been looking at homeopathic treatments, biodynamic preparations, planting calendars, application of sound energies, geomancy, etc. And what he's been saying, well, he's actually done a review of the research that's come out of this, and he's reviewed over 30,000 papers or screened them, and there are 200 that were robust enough and show that there is about 3/4 of them show a positive influence of applying these practices on the farming system in one way or another. And there's more detail about that tomorrow. Giannis will be speaking tomorrow afternoon, where he'll be going into that in more detail if you're interested in that. But there's peer-reviewed evidence that these practices work on the farm. And then just to sort of to finalize that there's a bigger picture about this. What I said, it's not just about looking at the reductionist practices, but this overall striving for balance and harmony. And the United Nations Development Programme has set up a new initiative on bringing consciousness into food and farming systems. It's a new alliance, and it's about reconnecting with ourselves, each other, and nature. And there's opportunities to get involved with that, and they have a sense that if we use these transformative practices for reconnecting with nature, this will change ourselves and our mindsets, which will have a positive impact on sustainability and regeneration. So thank you. Sorry about this. I've just got some links if you want to know more about this. There are various groups in the UK who are working on aspects of this, and I'll stop sharing there and then pass you over to Martin again. Thank you.
So thank you, Julia. And I hope everybody, I think there's 240 participants, which is amazing. And I hope everybody is still with us, because it's been an incredibly rich workshop so far. And thank you, Julia, for your approach to consciousness, because there is a new land consciousness emerging. And it's, as Hannah said, it's not so much about ownership, but about trusteeship. And we've got a new principle for access to land, which I'll talk about for 5 minutes now. A new Hannah Thorogood principles that fields do appear when you get started. So the new consciousness I encapsulate in Aldo Leopold's land ethic. When we see land as a community to which we belong, we may begin to treat it with love and respect. And there's some special places, special nature places and land places that many of us connect with as part of that consciousness. So land's not a commodity, it's a bundle of rights, and awareness is important. And that's connected with biophilia, which is part of our delight in being alive in a beautiful and abundant world. And when we're talking about community land access, that's what people need. So just some practical tips my background has been in community land trust development. We worked for nearly 10 years, and now there's a movement of over 400 community land trusts across England and Wales, mainly for housing, but also community facilities and land. And on the way, we did some work with community farmland trusts, like facilitating the Ford Hall Farm community buyout in 2006. However, if you're going on the individual route of land access, and by the way, the trouble is with land, as Mark Twain said, they're not making it anymore. As Hannah said, you don't have to own it. It's easier than you think to get hold of land from your area. There may be bits and pieces or fields to get started in Stroud in Gloucestershire, where I'm from. There's a whole project using back gardens, unused gardens, for example. Now, once you have started and people see what you're doing, then land may come and invitations may come to use fields or land, like me turning up at Marina's farm in smallholding in Essex at Manningtree, and inviting her as the Biodynamic Land Trust to come over to Totnes and farm there. And once she started farming and has established her farm, a miracle from a miserable bit of land, as Rob Hopkins called it, then other land has come, and she's been invited to lease 25 acres of glebe land. And you've heard about Hannah's story, started with 18 acres, and I think she also leases 100 acres from 5 landlords, and there may be 300 acres or 600 acres down the line as well. So that's more the individual farmer route, which is very healthy. But if you're going down the community route, community supported agriculture, who need to secure the land long term, because if you're organic, that's really important. So prepare the community well ahead and have the right structure, like a charitable community benefit society. And then, of course, you've got to act quickly with a share offer. And I think our record for a share offer for raising money for Oak Brook Community Farm in Stroud, which is the land is owned by the Biodynamic Land Trust, I think was 6 weeks, which is amazing in terms of response time. And the other key practical tip is what Marina does, which is building community and connection through participative planning and design. That's community building using permaculture design. And also, Julia didn't mention it, but in biodynamic circles, they use the Goethe 4-step process, which is a community process of looking at the facts of the land, soil type, etc., what's there, the processes, the pattern of sun pattern, water patterns, paths, etc., the characteristics, the different spaces on the farm, and then the farm story, the identity, the spirit of the place. And behind all of this is the more you weave social, cultural, food, economic aspects together, CSA, markets, forest schools, home education. We've got 35 children on Oak Brook Community Farm using a field for home education. Seasonal festivals, wildlife. At Oak Brook, we're keen on bees, and so there's a whole community of beekeepers interested in natural beekeeping. So it's weaving all these different threads together, and in terms of getting resources to buy land or get access to land, it works like magic because people have a need to connect with land. A friend called Jade Bashford, who was one of the pioneers of Stroud community supported agriculture, said of when we were raising money to buy Oak Brook Community Farm land, we all need land to belong to. But I love my learning from this morning is Hannah's saying that fields do appear, and once you get started, more land will come. So I love that. And it's a huge mountain to climb to buy both of the land and then to invest in infrastructure. So the Hannah route is to be desired. Okay, so let's segue on to the Q&A session. And I hope Helena, our volunteer, will help with this. But the first question and thank you for bearing with us. The first question was wondering when and where recordings will be available. And they're available, as far as I know, from the ORFC website and through the Hoover, is it, or the Wover app. And the first, is that right, Helena?
Yeah, and they'll be available on YouTube shortly.
On YouTube, wow. So the first question, and there's about 22 questions, from Mara Gallieno-Carraro. For Marina, which biodynamic practices do you use at Huxhams Cross Farm?
Hello, so we're registered biodynamic, and we use the preparations. So we use the horn manure and the horn silica. We try to use the horn manure, which my experience is that is incredibly effective at inoculating the soil with and recreating the soil biome. And we use the horn silica in the summer, and we use the compost preparations in the compost heaps that we make. And my next step is, so we make those preparations on the farm as well, and the next step is to make something called CPP, which then would get the compost preparations onto the larger part of the farm. In terms of the calendar, we don't use the calendar in our everyday farm activities. We use the calendar when we use the preparations. So we try and put the horn manure on at Earth Day, for instance. And the way this, all the talks that we've given today weave together is the practice of using those preparations. Is you tend to make them on the equinoxes, and you apply them in different parts of the year. So it's almost like a nature connection activity as a farmer. It gives you a moment to stop and stare and poke around all the corners of your farm. In fact, actually, I had a message this morning from some biodynamic farm friends in Suffolk who are, so it's the 6th of January today, and a lot of biodynamic farmers put on, they beat the bounds of their farm and put on special preparations, just as Julia talked about, to emphasize the boundaries and the edge of their farms. Because it's the 6th, it's Epiphany, I think, get my festivals correct. Thank you.
So thank you. There's Danielle Apadu has asked a couple of questions, and then we'll move on to the questions for Hannah. Danielle asks, question for Marina, how did you get the funds to start up the farm initially before getting shareholders? And another question is, Marina, you identified enough food for everyone as one of your initial aims. How did you identify your customer base, who you were going to be feeding? And did you identify this before purchasing the farm, starting the project? And do you subsidize any of your produce? That's quite, so how did you get the money, firstly, to start the farm before getting shareholders? And the other question.
So to answer the first question is, obviously Martin, who was director of the BDLT at the time, and Gabriel Kay, were in negotiation with Dartington Hall Trust, and Dartington Hall Trust wanted, as part of their land partnership programme, that they wanted to nestle lots of small enterprises within the estate. So we knew there was a kind of an agreement that this bit of parcel of land would be sold to the Biodynamic Land Trust, and the Apricot Centre would be the first tenant of the Biodynamic Land Trust. The Biodynamic Land Trust had some seed funding, so I think we had to raise, if my memory stands correct, we had to raise £100,000 to complete the sale. So half was seed funding and half was buying of shares. Some people lent some money that in the short term so that the sale could be completed. But it was a very, I wouldn't say it's a very pleasant experience, to be honest. It was very stressful. But it helped that the landowner wanted to, the Dartington Hall Trust was keeping it for us until we had the money ready. And then the second question, the start of the farm was very, very difficult because the Biodynamic Land Trust bought the land and they invested in what I call the hard land, hard infrastructure, so the barn and the training centre. So that was a second share offer once the land was secured. But we had the first 2 years on the farm was really very complex. So our colleague Bob Mayhew moved down and project managed. Basically, you know, there wasn't even an entrance. It was just 6 fields with no gates. And so we supported him financially we stayed on our farm in Essex and worked an extra job to give him some money, which wasn't clearly enough, but it was enough to, in that concept of fair shares, it was enough to keep him alive. And then in year 3, we basically started trading. So we got 150 hens, and then we started buying in produce from other local food producers, especially biodynamic and agroecological ones. And we started a small CSA and a market stall. So by trading, even though we weren't growing anything, we managed to just about squeak through those couple of years, but it was not very comfortable, I can say. Does that answer that sufficiently?
I think so. And just to lead, I think there's much more. I think I'd like to say to participants about Marina and Hannah's farm. They do run courses, and they're well worth a learning visit, because what you're hearing today is just the tip of an iceberg, and there's stories behind every question you ask. There's some questions for Hannah. Vicky Ward asks, Hannah, how do you transport your water? Peter Sampson asks, question to Hannah, do you make the hay yourself from land that you manage, or do you buy it in? And how does the balance between standing grass and hay work? And another question from Rachel Middleton, question for Hannah, could you please explain a bit more detail how you price fairly for all? So how long do we have, Hannah?
Oh, well, I can talk succinctly, but I'll probably talk too long. I just wanted to, I don't know if is my camera on, yeah. I just wanted to show you a view from a different angle. And I saw the question about water pop up and thought, I'm just standing in the perfect place, actually. So I can't remember who asked that question, but I've come over to the other corner of the farm. I'm standing in the southeast corner of the farm, and with a little mention about succession planning. This is my favourite corner up here, and I call this will be my hag hovel. So when my children, if they produce children, I'll move out of the house and come and be here and stare across at this view from up on the mountain at 22 metres in my autumn days. But anyway, this is our biggest rainwater pond. It's not all pretty and wildlife around the edges because this water level goes up and down, and we've had a really dry autumn, and so the water level is quite low. However, I don't know if you can see, but there's a silver suitcase there, which is actually our water pump system, and there's a little floater, for want of a better word, in the pond, and that water goes off along that yellow hose and down over to the cows over there. Now it's all frozen this morning, and so Nikki, who I know is listening, Nikki Huxley, is the master of ferrying water in cold weather up in North Scotland, but I might be having to join her exercise this year today of moving some water by hand. But the moving water to the other fields, there is our trailer with an IBC on it, so 10,000 litres of water can sit behind the old farm truck called Nora, and gets taken off to the other fields. So the sheep drink a lot less water than the cows, and so that IBC can last the sheep a fair amount of time, or the cows in summer sometimes just 1 or 2 days. There is a stream in the other cow field that they spend the rest of their time in, and and we take this pump system with us to that field. So it's a mobile pump system. Okay, so that's the water question. Peter, hello Peter, how are you? No, I don't make my own hay. It's an interesting situation because when it was mentioned before about how big the land area is of the Inkpot is quite an interesting situation, because we have a lovely relationship with one of our landlords, all of our landlords, but one of our landlords who has hundreds of acres, and he's asked me to graze about 300 acres of his that's in a stewardship scheme, and it needs to either be grazed or mown in just a couple of months late in summer. And we were going to get hay off those fields this year, and it hasn't happened, which is a little bit frustrating. And so I'm just having to talk to our organic certifying system provider, BDA, to say, please can we get some local hay rather than some organic hay this winter, which is always a really tricky one. But I do have a fantastic local supplier who uses very little chemicals. So it's very tricky in South Lincolnshire to find certified organic stuff, but we do, and but not for hay this year, it looks. So, and then the fair pricing one, that is an interesting one. I really like, you can look at my face to see how honest I am. No, that one of the really important aspects to the Inkpot is how we price things. So as Martin mentioned, we did run courses in the last couple of years. That hasn't happened due to COVID, but I've joined many courses online as guest teachers, and so we have a sliding scale for courses, and that is done on a self certifying system. So it's, you know, the kind of skint but willing, maybe can do a bit of labour exchange, pillar the community, and then the generous benefactor, so pay it forward kind of systems. The food is an interesting one, because we're producing an amazing product. It's Great Taste Award winning, you know, as it would be. And so it is, and it's organic, it's pasture for life, it's very high welfare, it sells itself. We have a number of different approaches to that, and so, but I don't believe in just charging customers for the sake of charging it. What I've actually done is looked at how many hours I spend working on the different animals, and I realized 2 years ago I felt awkward charging the amount that people charge for turkeys, but I realized I was being paid 11p an hour for the 2019 turkeys, for the hours that I was spending just on the turkeys, and so I thought, it's just not worth it. And so I put the prices up, and this year they went up to kind of, high-end organic kind of prices, and was able actually to be able to pay one of my teenage daughters to come out in the evenings and put turkeys away with me, which completely changed the family dynamic around who's going to come and put the turkeys away with me, which was often a little bit stressful. And so that's gone from thinking that we're going to have to stop the turkeys to being able to actually carry on for the foreseeable with the turkeys, which is great. And so then we have pay it forward options on the food. And so the price that I charge is somewhere between local butchers, and I do a survey of what supermarkets supply charge for organic, and what local butchers charge, and what actually our costs are, and how to live. And so just very quickly, this field when we first got here was a very depleted, very knackered, conventionally managed, ploughed. This is very heavy clay, nothing needs to go underneath that pond to hold water, and that was in 2010 that we got here, and it was being used for oilseed rape. And so I figured out that probably on average kind of yield, you're looking at probably 25 acres of oil, or 25 tons of oil seed rape that could come off this field. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm thinking that is about 12.5 grand income from oilseed rape, but that's gross income. That's obviously dependent on a lot of fertilizers and pesticides that this field was very, very dependent on when we first got here. And so I do permaculture designs on each of my enterprises and check in with them regularly. So the sheep, the cows, the turkeys, the chickens, the horses, randomly do humanist celebrancy stuff as well, events, jack of all trades. And I model my my enterprise designs on what if aiming to get 12 grand income for each of those enterprises, what would be needed. And after a couple of years of doing that, we're getting close to that for a few of the enterprises, which is exciting. And that's obviously multiple enterprises, not just the monoculture of oilseed rape. So I'm not in any way flush, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. And actually, over the last couple of years with COVID, we have been able to live off the farm. It's been tight at times, and through the power of our amazing customers and social media, especially with some of the wool last spring, then yeah, it's we can make a living off it.
Thank you. I can hear the chickens or turkeys.
It's the chickens. They're crossed with me. I haven't fed them yet.
Not been put away yet. So we've got 5 minutes. There was a very brief question about what calculator was used to estimate your carbon use sequestering. And I think there may have been another carbon question.
So we use Farm Carbon Toolkit. I think Sam, who's the CEO of that, is on this. He messaged me at some point, and it's amazing. So that is based at the Duchy College in Cornwall, but the spreadsheets are online. You can just download them and you input your data, like how much diesel you've bought and how much chicken food you've bought or whatever, and then you need to do some soil tests. Quite straightforward soil tests over. You have to. It's about comparisons, so you have to do it over at least a 2-year period, and you put all that data in this system, and it gives you. It's not only to my mind, it's actually more important as a tool to see where you're using your carbon and where you're sequestering it as part of a journey. But it's very, very good. I'd highly recommend it.
Yeah. There's some really important questions and reflections in Q&A, and it's very frustrating. There's only 4 minutes left, but there was just a very brief, perhaps, response, Marina, from Matthew Adams, who asks, somebody was asked. Sorry, I got the wrong question. Somebody was asking about the mental health aspects, Marina, of your farm, and Dan Hussey, a bit about how you've managed to integrate the clinical mental health offer alongside your regenerative food system.
Okay, so first of all, I'm just going to say in the last question, we give away our surplus at the end of the week. If we have excess produce that we've taken to market and we haven't sold, we give it to Food in the Community, and it's given out to people on low incomes for free. It's a bit like a fresh food bank that we have here in Totnes. Secondly, so Mark O'Connell is a family and child therapist. He worked for CAMS when we were in East Anglia. That's the NHS Children Mental Health Service, and they were seeing so children that have suffered from extreme trauma and that are looked after in the care system, basically suffer from, well, not suffer, but their brains become rewired, and they have extremely high stress hormones. So what we found in our little farm in Essex, and we've done more explicitly here in Devon, is that by taking these children out of a clinical setting and walking them through fields and doing the therapy outside in our little woodlands and spaces that we've created on the farm using creative therapists, it's incredibly successful and effective, because we can show them how to do something called self-regulation. So we've got a team of specialist therapists that work one-on-one with the children, and we designed it's all of the marginal places that we can't use for farming are absolutely superb for this, our little woodlands and those little corners that you can't use for farming. So they're full of nature, and we all know nature connection is good for us now post-COVID. That's funded by the social services. Each child comes with an adoption support fund. It's very complex. We have to be Ofsted registered, and but it brings a diversity to the farm. It brings people to the farm, and it brings a smile to the farm workers' faces when they see these children leave happy.
So thank you. Just there's 1 minute, just a few questions. Mara asks about community participatory planning and design. Lots of tips from Marina in the book. Chris Parker asks about natural beekeeping. Look at Oakbrook Community Farm website, and Christian Grutzmacher is our maestro natural beekeeper. Bernie Courts, biodynamic farmer, asks, I'd like to leave this question with us all, could there be a proactive way of attracting a more mainstream recognition of agroecology as a right to clean air, water, soil and food for humans and nature? Sounds like a section for next time. However, I would like to celebrate Marina's book. It's been a bit stuck in the warehouse. It was printed by Christmas. So Blackwell's may or may not have it already, but the book is available from the Apricot Centre and also direct from the Hawthorne Press website, hot off the press. And I'd like just to conclude with what Professor Jules Pretty said in his foreword. In 5 years, Marina O'Connell has created a productive, diverse, profitable and regenerative farm from depleted soil. I called it a desert. I called it a desert. And has said, over here is a path, now we can walk it. So many thanks to all the panelists.
Martin, just to say that I put the link to Marina's book in the chat. It's available on the Blackwell's ORC bookstore. So I put the link to the book so people can buy it there.
So thank you, Ruth.
Helena can find it in the chat, I think, for you.
Right. So many thanks for everybody participating. Lots of questions, lots of reflections. It's been a real cupboard of goodies in terms of contributions. And thank you all the panelists and all for making these solutions work from the ground up, and the fact that we're learning how to spread the learning around like muck. So the more we spread it around, the more these ground up solutions grow. So thank you very much and goodbye.